Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. Professor John Mearsheimer joins us now. Professor Mearsheimer, welcome here, my dear friend. We have not spoken since the onset of the war in Iran, and I and the viewers have longed to hear your views, and here we are. Before we get into anything granular about the causes and justifications, what's your view, big picture, of the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran that commenced on Saturday morning?
Well, when I think about this war, I almost quickly go to the big picture. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what are our goals? What do we have to do to achieve those goals? And what do we have to do to achieve those goals? In other words, what does winning mean for us meaning the United States and Israel? And then what does winning mean for the Iranians? What's their ultimate goal here? And what's the likelihood that they will achieve it? And my sense is, just looking at this, that we have unachievable goals here. That there's no way we can win this war in any meaningful way. And all the Iranians have to do is survive, and they win. And I think they will survive. So all of that's a way of saying I think we're in deep trouble.
Has the government, the Trump administration, been able to articulate, it's a three-part question, so we'll break it up however is easy for you to answer, a morally grounded, legally sound, or militarily achievable goal?
Well, they've not been able to explain what the goal is here in any coherent way. President Trump has been all over the place. It's breathtaking how fast he moves from saying we're doing this war for this reason, then on to that reason, then on to another reason. But I think your question is largely irrelevant, to be honest, because your question assumes that we're driving the train. In other words, what are our goals here? As if the United States had clear-cut goals that we were pursuing on our own. The fact is, the Israelis are in the driver's seat. That's very clear. Tucker Carlson met with President Trump, and President Trump basically told him he had no choice but to go to war. And what Tucker is being told is that the Israelis are driving the train and that Trump is effectively following orders. So what our goals are is largely irrelevant. The question you want to ask yourself are, what are Israeli goals? And it's quite clear what Israeli goals are.
Here is Tucker Carlson yesterday. I want to talk to you about this. Did the United States and Israel agree back in December, right around New Year's Eve, to attack? Or did Netanyahu force Trump's hand? Cut number 23. That last statement is probably true, isn't it?
It's true, I think. But I would note that the Israelis tried to trap Joe Biden into going to war against Iran twice in 2024. You remember in April of that year, they attacked the Iranian embassy in Syria, in Damascus. And then in October, they attacked inside of Tehran. They killed the Palestinian leader in Tehran. And the end result of both of those Israeli attacks was that you had an exchange, a missile exchange between both Israel and Iran. And the Israelis wanted to pull us into that war. They wanted to pull the Biden administration in. And the Biden administration did not take the bait. We stayed out. We helped defend Israel when the Iranians attacked Israel. And the missile exchanges between the two countries were taking place. But the Biden administration was smart enough not to get involved in attacking Iran itself. And then you have the Trump administration, which has now twice gotten involved in attacking Iran itself, not simply defending Israel. You remember in the 12-day war in June of 2025, that's last year, we on June 22nd bombed Iran. And in this case, we're now involved in a full-scale bombing campaign against Iran. So the point I would make to you is that although the Biden administration helped defend Israel in 2024, it did not go to war, although the Israelis wanted to drag us into war.
Wow. Is there a morally sound basis for this invasion?
No, nor is there a legally sound basis for this invasion, both in terms of domestic law and in terms of international law.
International law, of course, would not justify the Americans deciding, we don't like President Pezeshkian and we don't like the now deceased Ayatollah, and therefore we're going to commence regime change. Put aside the politics of that. That's not a basis for an invasion.
No, absolutely not. I think almost everybody agrees on that. But President Trump doesn't care about international law, and he doesn't care about law here in the United States. He's a unilateralist. He just does whatever he wants. And he feels that the law is just something that can be ignored whenever he thinks it's convenient to do so.
Well, how about militarily achievable? The information that we get is so contradictory. The director of national intelligence states that is truthfully, I think, that the intelligence community assesses that Iran has not been working on a nuclear weapon since 2003, 23 years ago, because of one man who stopped them, who they since have murdered, the Ayatollah. The Secretary of Defense, who calls himself the Secretary of War, says this is not about regime change. The president says, oh, come out into the streets. We'll tell you when. Stay home. We'll tell you when to come out in the streets and take over your government. Therefore, it is about regime change. The Secretary of State says they were building weapons that someday could harm us. Building weapons that someday could harm us. That is hardly an imminent danger.
But again, there's no imminent threat to the United States. And we, as I said at the top of the show, don't have clear-cut goals of our own. This is why President Trump is all over the map when he explains why we're doing this. It's the Israelis who are in the driver's seat. And the Israelis have made it unequivocally clear that their goal is regime change. And let me just say a bit more about this. People talk about eliminating the missiles, the ballistic missiles that the Iranians have. They talk about eliminating once and for all Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, and finally Iran's ability to support Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. But you can't do any of these things unless you have regime change. There has to be a story here that you change the regime, and that new regime then decides it's not going to build ballistic missiles, it's not going to support the Houthis and Hamas, etc., and it's not going to pursue nuclear enrichment. You have to get rid of the regime. The Israelis understand this, and you have to believe that, number one, you can get rid of the regime, and number two, that you can put a new regime in place that will decide to never go down the nuclear enrichment road, to never build ballistic missiles, and to never support the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah. That's what you have to believe. So regime change has to be the goal here, because it's the only way of solving those other problems. If you go in and destroy the missiles, or you go in and eliminate the nuclear enrichment capability, they'll just rebuild those assets. So you have to get regime change, and you have to believe that the new regime will not be interested in all of those military options. That's the issue here. And I ask anybody who thinks this military operation is going to work Do you think you're going to get regime change? Is that going to be the end result? And if you do think we're going to get regime change, do you think that that new regime is going to not want missiles, nuclear enrichment, and not want to support the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah? I find it impossible to come up with a plausible story that tells me how you get regime change and you get a new regime that has no interest in doing those three things.
Well, did Netanyahu force Trump's hand by saying, as Tucker says, Rubio told the Gang of Eight? And I think that is what Rubio told the Gang of Eight, because he revealed part of what he told the Gang of Eight. This whole Gang of Eight thing is so profoundly unconstitutional. The law requires notifying Congress, not a select 8 members, and you don't tell those 8 members under the vow of secrecy, so they can't tell the other members of Congress, they can't tell their constituents, they can't tell the press. That's not a democracy. But we can put that aside. Put that aside for the moment. Did Netanyahu force Trump's hand, or was this joint attack planned all along for the day on which the attack began?
Look, it's not just Israel. It's Israel plus the lobby, the Zionist lobby, the Israel lobby here in the United States. Trump has been under tremendous pressure from the lobby. Furthermore, if you look at his negotiating team, he has his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff as his 2 principal negotiators. These are the 2 principal representatives of the United States who deal with the Iranians. These are arch Zionists. These are 2 people who are deeply committed to Israel. These are Israel's lawyers. This tells you that it's not just Israel itself that's putting pressure on the United States, and the United States is therefore jumping to Israel's command. It's Israel plus the lobby. If you didn't have this enormously powerful lobby here in the United States putting pressure on President Trump and his predecessors, we'd have had over time, and we would have today, a fundamentally different approach to dealing with Israel. We treat it like a normal country, but we don't treat it like a normal country. We treat it specially. We have a relationship with Israel that has no parallel in recorded history. And that's what's driving the train here. So it's not just Israel alone. Now, the question of what happened in the planning process, it's just very hard to say. I find it hard to believe that they decided in late December of last year that they were going to attack at some point, and it was only a matter of when. I'm sure that they had significant contingency plans, and I'm sure they were talking about the likelihood of attacking, but whether they actually had planned to attack when they did over the weekend, it's hard to say.
Can you get your arms around, as a veteran of the Air Force, the cost of amassing all of that military hardware there, the hundreds of planes, the dozens of ships, the thousands of troops?
I can't. And the truth is that we have to wait till the whole operation is over before we can really get a good sense of how much this is going to cost. But it's obviously going to be an enormous sum of money. I mean, President Trump is now talking about this war going on for 4 or 5 weeks. I think it's probably going to go on longer than that, but who knows for sure, but it's going to cost us an enormous amount of money. I think as important as the question of how much it costs us is what it does to our inventory of weapons. To what extent are we going to run down our inventory of weapons, and what are the consequences of that for the Ukraine war and for the war or a possible war in East Asia against China? I mean, the Chinese must be licking their chops at the thought that we're not only pinned down in Ukraine, we're now pinned down in the Middle East, and that we're expending huge amounts of ammunitions. And we're not exactly a country that has a potent manufacturing base that can easily replace all these munitions that we're expending.
China buys a lot of oil from Iran. Would China allow the Iranian government to go under and be replaced by someone totally subservient to Trump who might affect that oil relationship in a way that's not in China's best interest?
Well, I don't think it's feasible that the United States could get that kind of government. I mean, I think that's a pipe dream. The Trump administration, the Israelis may think that's the case, but that's not going to happen. So I don't think the Chinese are going to have to worry much about that. Whatever government takes over in Tehran is going to be hostile to the United States. The idea that any government in Iran that takes over is going to be